Is a Russia-NATO war on the horizon? This is a question that analysts, policymakers, and military strategists are increasingly forced to ask in today's tense geopolitical climate. Since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, relations between Moscow and NATO have deteriorated to levels not seen since the Cold War. With military buildups, nuclear rhetoric, and expanding alliances, the situation is becoming more volatile by the day. But does this really mean that a direct war between Russia and NATO is inevitable, or are both sides carefully maneuvering to avoid such a catastrophic outcome? Since 2022, the security picture in Europe has been dominated by Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But in 2024-2025, that conflict has produced a widening spillover of incidents that directly touch NATO territory. Unmanned aerial vehicles and reconnaissance aircraft entering NATO airspace, strikes and sabotage on infrastructure in or near alliance states, and increasingly bold Russian naval and air posturing in the Black Sea and Baltic regions. These are not isolated headlines. Specialist monitors and campaign assessments catalog a steady stream of probes and strikes that have forced NATO to scramble fighters and to shoot down intruding drones. The practical effect is twofold. 1. NATO experience of responding to low-cost hybrid tools, drones, cyber, sabotage, is increasing. And 2. Moscow is testing where and how the alliance will respond, looking for seams in political unity and reaction time. Capability matters. Western defense officials and independent analysts have repeatedly warned that Russia's conventional forces were degraded by the Ukraine war, but are being reconstituted. Several assessments have suggested that within a multi-year horizon, Moscow could rebuild enough heavy forces to mount limited operations beyond Ukraine if it chose to do so. That is a realistic warning, but not an inevitability. Rebuilding combat power takes time, material, training, logistics, and political will, and NATO's own force posture is changing in response, including renewed procurement, forward deployments, and a diversified set of countermeasures, anti-drone systems, coastal defenses, and enhanced maritime surveillance. In short, the capability gap that once favored Russia may narrow over the next several years, and the military timeline is a moving target rather than a fixed countdown. Any sober analysis must put nuclear weapons at the center of escalation dynamics. Both NATO and Russia continue to assert that nuclear use would be catastrophic and must be avoided. NATO's public posture emphasizes that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. That shared, chilling truth functions as a very high threshold against full-scale war between nuclear-armed blocs. Yet the nuclear calculus also creates dangerous ambiguity. Lower-level strikes or covert actions that avoid outright attribution can be used to signal resolve without crossing the red line. This is why many strategists speak of a layered deterrence, conventional resilience, reinforced conventional deployments, and clear political messaging about collective defense, rather than reliance on nuclear threats alone. Modern conflict often starts well below the threshold of declared war. Over the last 2 years, analysts and institutions have documented a marked rise in sabotage, energy infrastructure attacks, information campaigns, and other shadow war tactics attributed to or linked with Russian state actors. Those actions aim to coerce, to bleed political will, and to create uncertainty among NATO publics. They are dangerous precisely because they invite misattribution and could produce inadvertent escalation. For example, a sabotage event inside a NATO country that is traced or mistraced to a proxy or to an ambiguous actor could trigger a forceful response. Managing attribution, transparency, and calibrated response options is therefore central to keeping incidents from spiraling. NATO's deterrent depends as much on politics as on tanks. The alliance is strongest when members share purpose and resolve. But politics has become a friction point in recent years. Different threat perceptions among European capitals, differing appetites for risk, and shifts in U.S. policy posture have all complicated a single, cohesive line. Some analysts argue NATO still benefits from robust collective structures and a clear principle, Article 5, while others say political fragmentation or domestic fatigue in major member states could blunt deterrence in a crisis. The paradox is that visible political division can invite probing behavior from an adversary, but rigid cohesion without political flexibility can be brittle. The alliance must signal credibility while preserving room to maneuver diplomatically. There are several realistic pathways, short of deliberate total war, that could nonetheless result in direct NATO-Russia combat. A misidentified or misattributed strike on a NATO member blamed on Russia. B. An aggressive interdiction of a NATO vessel or aircraft in choke points, such as the Black Sea or the Baltic, that spirals into exchange of fire. C. Large-scale sabotage or cyber attacks on critical infrastructure that prompt kinetic retaliation. And D. Sustained cross-border drone campaigns that lead to air engagements. In each case, escalation is a function of speed, how fast states react, attribution, how clearly responsibility is established, and political signaling, how leaders choose to show resolve. Managing those variables through clear crisis communications, pre-agreed rules of engagement, and transparent investigation mechanisms reduces, but does not eliminate, the risk. Despite rhetoric, there are strong motives for restraint on the Russian side. Full confrontation with NATO would risk strategic isolation, severe economic and military fallout, and, crucially, potential nuclear escalation. Moreover, Russia has alternative levers: proxy warfare, energy coercion, and political influence that can be used to pursue goals without risking existential war. Domestic constraints, economic cost, manpower limits, and the uncertain returns of a wider war also counsel caution. This is not to underplay Moscow's willingness to take risky action, but rather to explain why direct invasion of NATO territory is not currently the most rational first option for senior Russian decision-makers. NATO's calculus likewise favors deterrence and defense rather than deliberate offensive escalation against Russia. Most NATO members prefer to absorb and manage provocations while strengthening defensive posture, leveraging sanctions, information campaigns, and targeted defensive assistance to partners like Ukraine. The alliance's long-term strategy has emphasized raising the cost of aggression through conventional reinforcement and by denying easy political gains, rather than seeking decisive offensive operations that could precipitate a wide war. In short, both sides retain strong incentives to avoid spiral-out conflict, but incentives are not guarantees. In the final analysis, a full-scale Russia-NATO war is not inevitable, but the strategic climate is riskier now than at any point in decades. The next few years will be decisive, whether by improving alliance cohesion, tightening deterrence, and increasing crisis transparency. NATO can keep incidents from growing into a general war. For viewers, the takeaway is simple but consequential. Watch the data: troop movements, verified sabotage, coalition unity, not only the noise. Demand clear, factual reporting from institutions you trust, and understand that peace in this era depends as much on political choices in capitals as on the number of tanks in a field. If you found this useful, like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.